First of all, thank you for everyone joining us tonight. This is our general membership meeting of Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club. We cover most of 6 counties across the southern tier, stretching from Tioga County in the west all the way to Sullivan County in the east. And we have over 1,300 members. Thank you to everyone that's joined us tonight for your interest, and think about what questions you might have. This meeting features Nobel Prize laureate Dr. Stanley Whittingham. He's going to be giving us a presentation on the New Energy New York project, which won $113 million in grant money. And Binghamton University itself is kicking in another couple of $1 million. And so this is a very important project, not just for our community, but for the nation and for the world. First, I want to give a few announcements. Thank you to our Susquehanna Group members who voted in our election for executive committee members. Our executive committee is composed of volunteers who put their names in as potential candidates to become members of the executive committee and help participate in making decisions to guide the direction of our group and where we focus our efforts on, and where some of our funds might go to help finance some things. The election results are in, and congratulations to executive committee members who won re-election. Karen Boba, who is our secretary, Scott Laufer, who is our vice chair, Joanne Lettuce, who is our treasurer, and also thank you for continuing to volunteer as members of the executive committee. Also, congratulations, thanks, and welcome to Dr. Laura Pangalozzi, who has won election and is now officially a member of our executive committee. She's on this meeting tonight, so welcome to our group and to our executive committee officially. Thanks again. And then the second announcement I have is for our general membership meeting next month, Tuesday, February 21st, will feature Elliot Wagner, who will give us an update on the Binghamton Johnson City Joint Sewage Treatment Plant, also known as a wastewater treatment plant for people that don't like the word sewage. Does anybody else have any announcements they would like to make related to environmental matters or the Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So I am pleased to introduce Dr. Stanley Whittingham, Distinguished Professor of Chemistry and Materials Science at Binghamton University, who was awarded the 2019 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for being the original inventor of the first rechargeable lithium metal battery. His work to create lithium-ion batteries was patented in 1977 while working for Exxon, which was then called Esso. And he then worked to help the company commercialize those batteries for small devices and for electric vehicles. Just for context, this was during the same decade that Exxon scientists analyzed data and issued internal documents predicting remarkably accurately how much global warming would be likely to occur in subsequent decades due to continued use of fossil fuels. So this is an amazing juxtaposition that we have Dr. Whittingham with us, who was there at the same time that these internal analysis and discoveries were being made. We are very fortunate that Dr. Whittingham chose to become a professor at Binghamton University in 1988 and make this community his new home. At Binghamton University, he helped establish the material science and engineering program and is continuing to lead research focused on improving energy storage and in particular lithium-ion batteries in order to enable wider adoption of renewable energy such as wind and solar, as well as improving range and affordability of electric vehicles. A spin-off of this research has already resulted in the establishment of a new improved chemistry lithium-ion battery which is now, well, not just the battery, but the manufacture of these batteries. They started production in August of last year in the heart of Endicott at the old IBM complex, which is called the Huron campus. Dr. Whittingham has published over 200 scientific papers and has 16 patents. Because his work has already benefited the environment in very important ways by reducing battery waste, for example, and because he is continuing to work to advance research and development that will serve a vital role in protecting the environment, our executive committee voted to recognize Dr. Whittingham by giving him the Linda Spickard Environmental Award on behalf of the Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club. Thank you, Dr. Whittingham, for your ongoing work and leadership in advancing energy storage, as these efforts are now going to help our region become a major coalition hub for energy storage called the New Energy New York Project. This will help our community deserve to be called the Green Valley of Opportunity and will help our region, New York State, and our nation do its part to help save a habitable climate. This is the plaque. It's quite substantial. It's made of stone, and we're going to give this to you when we have a chance. It comes with a stand to hold it, and the artist did a very nice job in putting the words on there that we put together to help honor you. This plaque is made to signify this honor. It is made of stone, which symbolizes our planet and where materials to make batteries come from. It is painted deep green to symbolize the life on Earth that your work is destined to protect, and is in the shape of a flame, symbolizing hope for a brighter future. I'm going to read what it says so that people know. It has the following text on it: Linda Spickard Environmental Award 2023, recognizing Dr. Stanley Whittingham, Nobel Prize laureate, inspiring students to imagine and create, leading battery innovation, enabling the electrical century to help save a habitable climate. And this award comes to you, Dr. Whittingham, with a huge heartfelt thank you. So on behalf of the community and Susquehanna Group, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
All right. And I hope that it helps you remember that there are people in your community that deeply care about what you're doing and do appreciate it. And it's something that, you know, you might not be considered a typical environmentalist, but you are an environmentalist. So thank you very much. So if you can go ahead, you're welcome to start your presentation if you can share. All right, thank you.
You can all see this and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. So what I want to do is give you a little bit of background before I actually get into New Energy in New York. But perhaps two things I want to make a point of is the US Department of Energy has supported my work since about 1993. So they are very important to this field and in solving climate change and reducing pollution and so on. But I also want to point out what the Nobel Committee said, that we had laid the foundation of a wireless, fossil fuel-free society. Basically now we've laid the foundation, we've got to move to the next step and make things happen. So I don't think I need to say much. I think you all know what's going on in the world at the moment. Whether it's this last week or two in California with all these strange storms, which I gather is coming to an end today. But we've seen throughout the world, and it doesn't matter what continent you're on, we've got the extreme conditions, and it can be overheating or it can be overcooling. But I show you just some examples, and One I always like to point out is this Victoria Glacier. In Banff National Park, I used to go to Lake Louise every other year, and you could easily walk to it in about November timeframe. The last few times, it's basically disappeared. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. So we have to solve this problem before we destroy the climate. What I want to talk about now is what I call global messing up rather than global warming, which is disrupting us. And we've gone through basically two major disruptions to our life in the last 30 years. A very positive one for most people is the communications revolution. Most people don't realize that even 20 years ago, there were no iPhones or Samsung phones. We didn't have those. Internet was very primitive. But nowadays, you know instantly what's happening in any part of the world if you want to know. So that's been a huge revolution. The younger generation doesn't really realize how things were 20 years ago. But the last 3 years have been really another disruption, and that's COVID. That's just pointed out a few things. One, it's shown you that we've gone far too far on global supply chains. We can't rely on countries where they dominate, say, 70 to 90% of the market. And we saw this initially for masks against the virus. We're seeing it in semiconductors and a large number of other areas now. But it also showed how fast we could move when we wanted to. So we came up with vaccines. It basically made most of us safe here. I think China's now learning the penalty of not pushing vaccines harder. But we now have to adapt to climate change. I don't think we're going to roll it back, but we can control how much worse it gets in the future. So clearly, I think everybody knows we've got to reduce fossil fuels. And I think it's key that New York State does not generate 1 kilowatt hour of energy from coal anymore. And those of you who are around about 2011, 2012, will remember we had a battery storage facility at the Westover coal power plant. 1 month after that battery storage facility was installed, the coal power plant closed down for good. That particular battery is now in Ohio. They can make more money there. But what I want to emphasize at this point, we have to be very politically savvy. We have to push renewable energy as a cleaner energy, but also a cheaper energy. And I make this point because Texas is not exactly known for being climate friendly, but they are installing more renewable energy than any other state in the US. Of their planned new power plants, over 95% are renewable energy. And it's basically economics driving that. So we have to keep pushing on that. Is economics are better for solar, wind, than gas or coal. But the issue with solar and wind, we all know that. The wind doesn't blow much in the Binghamton area, and the sun shines some days and not others. So we have to have storage for that energy. Where we are lucky, and really in Northeast and the Northwest are lucky, we have a lot of hydro, which could be base load. Today, lithium batteries are the dominant form of portable energy. Every device you've got, I think, probably has a lithium battery in it, and there's not probably a single person on this Zoom call that doesn't have at least one lithium battery on themselves right at this moment. But let me go back to the beginning. This year, or late last year, was really the 50th anniversary of us building the first lithium batteries at what was then Esso, then Exxon, now ExxonMobil. Exxon really had the foresight to get into renewable energy. They wanted to build electric vehicles. Remember that we had no thinking of internets or anything at that time. So they had the foresight there, and they worked on fuel cells, batteries, They were the largest manufacturer of solar photovoltaic cells in the United States. They did all the nuclear reprocessing for the United States during that period. So they're very active. And as pointed out at the beginning, they also had a very powerful team looking at climate change and what was happening there. It's my understanding a lot of that early work was published in the open literature. So it's there for everybody to see. But what I want to show you on the right of this picture are some of the batteries we actually built. We have a paperweight there in the top right-hand side. You can see the small battery in that. And that is driven by a solar cell. And it drives a watch. It's not too clear, the watch at the moment. That battery has been working for almost 50 years. So a well-made lithium battery can last for a long time. Below that are some batteries which are about 6 inches by 4 inches by about 1 inch thick. These are lithium batteries for driving EVs, and this was exhibited at the EV show in Chicago in 1977. Most people have forgotten there was a huge push in the United States in the late 70s to go back to electric vehicles. That stopped basically when the oil prices went back down again. So that's where we stood at that time. This is where we stand now. And now I show you a few local things there. A Raymond lithium battery professional forklift truck. Beneath that, a BAE Systems bus. At the bottom there, I show you 3 other buses. I was in London early December. And the London bus system are trying to go clean. So you'll see the big picture there is a hydrogen-powered bus. Over here, we have an electric bus. This is a hybrid bus, and this is a cleaner diesel bus. So in London, they're experimenting with all different sorts of buses to clean the atmosphere up. And by about, I think, 2030, there will be no internal combustion engines in the center of London. Above that is a small car that my wife and I rented in Bermuda. This goes, I would say, 20, 30 miles maybe. We were told if we drive it to the far end of the island and then tried to drive back, we better charge it up before we got back. It was, I think, the second or third car on the island. So we drove to the far end of the island. They were still building the charging stations. So range anxiety is real. Fortunately, we found a charging station at a hotel on the way back. On the right-hand side are 2 trucks, again, totally electric. These are by Peterbilt in their facility just north of Seattle. And in 2019, I had a chance of driving both these vehicles around their test tracks. And this electric truck takes off just like the Tesla car. If you put your foot down, as it were, it really goes. So this particular truck is now in the Los Angeles dock, moving containers from the dock to distribution points. The one on the right is a garbage truck, a perfect use of electric vehicle, because stop, start, up and down all day long. So we're going to see more and more trucks. As most of you know, in Broome County, a sizable percentage of the buses are hybrid buses. So we're already beginning to go clean, and hopefully those will become all electric in time. If you look at what's happening in cars, I think you all know. No, the growth of electric vehicles is going up exponentially. And there's really the limit on the growth is not consumer demand. The limit on growth is the ability of the auto companies to make enough batteries. If you want a Ford Lightning pickup truck, you've got to wait 15 months now. I think they've closed the waiting list. Similarly for the Mustang. And I think GM's having the same sort of issues. So there's a huge demand there, and we have to meet it. Another use of lithium-ion batteries, when we were in Stockholm in 2019, these 2 astronauts had just finished replacing all the old nickel metal hydride batteries on the International Space Station with lithium-ion batteries. And they are very happy. They're half the size, half the weight, and will last twice as long. So lithium-ion is getting everywhere. So let's look at grid storage, which is really a growing area. If we have renewable, we have to have storage. By far, the largest mean of storage is pumped hydro. And I show you this facility, which is about halfway between Binghamton and Albany. These are extremely efficient now. They're 73% efficient. The challenge here, there's limited new sites, partly political reasons, partly environmental reasons, and maybe also costs. But I was recently in Spain, and they're installing 2 new pumped hydro stations there away from rivers, so they don't affect rivers at all. So if we don't use pumped hydro, then the next opportunity is really batteries. And batteries really holding the energy as chemical energy, then converting it to electrical. These are by far the most flexible, the most common. They can be portable, they can be stationary. We can go from milliwatts to gigawatts, and they can switch off in milliseconds, unlike the pumped hydro, which takes several minutes to start up. So this is where we stand for grid energy storage. I show you several facilities here. Let's start in the bottom right-hand corner. That's this, what was, I think, an 8 megawatt facility in Binghamton in 2011. I said this was next to the coal power plant. It was one of the earliest grid storage facilities in the United States. Above that is this West Virginia wind farm. This lithium batteries here smooth out the power from the turbines and shift the power, so they can store it for about 8 hours if necessary. But by far the largest facility in the world is used to store the excess solar energy in California. This is 1.6 gigawatt hours. It's at Moss Landing, and it's been operational for 2 or 3 years. And they've got the okay to increase this to over 5 gigawatt hours. So lithium batteries are effective. You see this one at Moss Landing is built in an old gas-fired power plant. This has huge advantages because the whole grid infrastructure is already in place. You don't have to pay for it. So I think you can see more and more of that occurring. So what's going to happen in the next decade? Not many changes. So you're going to see lithium batteries are going to keep dominating. We are going to be having to work on new manufacturing technologies. And I'll point out a little later on, we cannot catch up with the Asians. We have to leapfrog what they're doing. In addition to that, we have to come up with new means of doing clean mining with clean energy. The big challenge in all technology is the mining is still dirty. It uses carbon, so there's a lot of CO2 generated there. And we all know the water issues in South America. So we have to come up with totally new processing and manufacturing techniques. We also, if we want a sustainable society, we've got to have clean recycling technologies. Folks are working on that now. They could be better than what they are today. But more important than anything else, we need regional supply chains. Almost all the materials that go into batteries go through China at some point or other. So as I'll show you a battery in a moment, I think over 90% of the carbon in the battery is processed in China because it has to use hydrofluoric acid, and that's not viable in the Western world as an economic level. So to do support this regional supply chain, Europe has one. They've been working on this for 5 years. We're talking about building this capability in Endicott so we can have made in America batteries. We can also, in the southern tier, then also have an ecosystem for clean energy. And what we're trying to do these days is not use the word green. We prefer to use the clean, low-cost energy, because green has some connotations with left wing as opposed to the red side. So to keep folks happy, we use clean and economically viable. So let's look at this supply chain. It's too constrained. So it gives us security and sustainability issues. I said this, we found out all this during the COVID period. We cannot rely on others if they're supplying, I would say, more than 30% of the market. And in the battery area, they're supplying more than 70% at the moment. But we have to solve some of these issues by actually doing research to eliminate the present critical elements. These may be rare earth elements in the motors. We have to take the cobalt out of the present batteries. There's a new cobalt mine just opened up in Idaho, but the minerals are now processed in either Brazil or Finland. They're not processed in North America. It should be feasible in my mind that a refinery or chemical plant can make all the carbon, the artificial carbon we need for batteries. That should be viable. We should better source all those locally. And by locally, I talk about North America, and I think I've convinced the US Department of Energy to stop talking about everything has to be USA. Canada is very close to us. They have a lot of nickel up there. They have some lithium up there, and they have carbon up there. And they have a huge amount of clean hydropower to do the processing with. So I think we all know universities are leading the world in chemistry IP. This is basically universities in North America, in Britain, and a few in Europe. US is clearly leads the world in startup companies. These push the frontiers. But one has to be aware they have exponential hype to raise money. So don't believe everything you read. But we have really right now a major gap in actually prototyping batteries and in battery equipment. That's equipment to actually make batteries. But these are changing. We have now got extensive federal funding, not only for us, but for numerous facilities throughout the states. And essentially, we're following the example of Europe, but we're about 5 years behind. So let's look at what the real issue is. This is, let's say yesterday, I've got today on there, but really, we have all the chemistry ideas here. We can make small, what we call R&D type cells. We make these in a number of places. We can test these at the facilities at RIT and New York Best up in Rochester. And what happens next, though, these are maybe 10 watt hours. If you want to make 1,000 cells for a test, all this technology then gets shipped to China. The cells are made there and then sent back to the US. So all that technology is now gone to Asia. We've lost it. So our goal was to actually change that. And that's why we put in this proposal. So what we proposed is to build a facility in Endicott. This is through the Economic Development Agency. So it has to be built in a depressed area. So the place chosen was the old IBM buildings in Endicott. Those are essentially not used. There's a lot of people there underemployed who want jobs. So the goal there was to build full-size battery manufacturing lines, not huge quantities. So we can make maybe 30 megawatt hours a year, not gigawatt hours. So they can be evaluated, tested, and then that will allow a gigafactory to have comfort that they can actually be successful. So we have two goals: make those cells. We also want to encourage equipment manufacturers to make equipment now for batteries where they may have been making them for other things in the past. And I can give you an example there. I was up at a winery this summer and visited their wine, I'll call it processing area. All the equipment in there was made in Germany. But then I noticed the big storage tanks were made in Rochester, New York. And I asked them, how come everything else wasn't made locally? They said when they built the facility, they found a company in Rochester that made small tanks. They convinced them to make large tanks, and that company now dominates the tank industry for vineyards in New York State. So we want to do the same thing with equipment manufacturers, convince them to make equipment that can make batteries. And right now, there's only one or two in the US that make any parts of that equipment. It turns out one of those is in Towanda, Pennsylvania, and they're called Frontier. We will be using them, their facilities. Some of their equipment's already at RIT. So we're going to make cells and make new battery equipment, and then do commercial manufacturing in the southern tier of New York. When it's successful here, then we'll spread it. As was pointed out, no, IM3 New York is in, I would say, beginning production in Endicott right now. They're making cells based on technology developed by the CEO of that company whilst he was a postdoc at the university. So he started up first a research company, then the Gigafactory. And be assured, this is not an easy process. It took them about 5 years to get the funding. It took some smart help from a lady downtown Binghamton who told us a couple of places were having fire sales on old battery plants. One of those was in, I think, North Carolina. It was appeared to have not actually been used. So I encourage my colleague, Shelley Schupretti, take a look at it. And we told him on a Friday. On a Saturday, he went, looked at it. By Sunday, they had a bid in for that equipment, and most of that equipment is now in Endicott. Similar equipment came from, I think, Indiana, from an old A123 facility. So they're able to build this facility in Endicott for much lower cost than would have been feasible if they bought brand new equipment. And it also stopped this equipment going to the scrapyard. So let me explain a little bit more about New Energy New York, what it does. It has 5 components. The battery center itself is about half the funding, somewhere between $50 and $60 million. That is partly federal funding, and New York State is giving us funding for 10 years. Now, it's not much after the first 4 or 5 years, but it's base funding to keep it going, covering the rent and the CEO's stipend. We then have an effort at the supply chain, and this is where the materials come from, where we can get them, and to bring those companies into the southern tier. So if we have a gigafactory here, they need supplying, and if we can get those companies here as well. And the biggest need we found when we talked to maybe between 50 and 60 different companies in the region, the biggest cry they had was, we don't have people who can make batteries, who can connect the batteries to solar systems or to wind farms, or even put them in cars. So we have about $12 million to actually develop a workforce development program, which will be coming out of Binghamton with some help from RIT. As I mentioned before, this is based in Endicott. The goal there is to really rejuvenate that whole area. After, IBM had about 10,000 people there. They all just basically got closed down. So we're trying to get jobs back there, getting the young kids involved, getting them to work on the floor and train them to be managers and so on. But to do all of this, we need technology. So we have what we call acceleration, which is really startup companies. We're going to invest in those so we can get new technologies, and new technologies for actually making the batteries and chemistry as well, so we can leapfrog the Asians. So let's look what's actually in this battery facility in Endicott. It's going to allow flexible technology development. I've already mentioned it. It will encourage American equipment manufacturers. We're going to test new manufacturing methods so we can leapfrog the agents. And one of our goals is to keep all the bad chemicals out of the system. So this NMP, which is an organic solvent, is used to make the paste, to make the electrodes. Not only is this toxic, but it's extremely expensive to recover it. So, for example, our small pilot line is going to cost over $1 million to build that facility with a recycling capability for that NMP. So once we've got all that in place, then we'll have a demonstration site where companies can come in, make their pouch cells, test out their materials, their ideas, before they go on to the full commercial scale. So the official kickoff was last fall, and you may recognize a few faces here. On the left-hand side is Dr. Castillo, who is the secretary for the Economic Development Agency. I was explaining to her the size of the battery is what we're trying to do, and this is in the IM3 New York Endicott battery facility. On the right-hand side, the same day, Senator Schumer came to Binghamton, and he's been an extremely strong supporter of this effort, and he's obviously a supporter of New York State, but he's a really strong environmental supporter and pushing that we have to become independent and do our own things. And just to finish off a few comments here, North America is the leader in pushing frontiers of battery materials. I'm part of what's called a Battery 500 Consortium. This is probably the leading research consortium in the world, and this is run out of Pacific Northwest National Lab. Already mentioned, North America leads the world in investing in startups. So we have to use all our know-how and keep it here and not give it away to others. In order for us to get back in this business, we need huge government investments, and the Biden administration is doing that. I already mentioned we cannot play catch up. There's no way we can do that. We have to leapfrog the Asians and do better. We have to recycle all our materials and keep them here. Don't do what some recycling companies are doing. They collect the materials and they're shipping them overseas. For example, we're short of cobalt, huge amount of cobalt on all your phones and things like that. They're going to be recycled. And the largest recycling company right now is Lithium Cycle. They're a Canadian company, but their major plant is in Rochester, New York. So this will reduce the imports of valuable materials and help us have a viable business. So let me stop there, and I'll stop sharing. And happy to take any questions you might have. But
there's one
ahead of us.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Whittingham. There's one question in the chat, and we'll ask people to use the hand raise function, and if they want to ask questions. But the question in the chat is there, oh man, there's a few more questions that are coming in. All right, let's go back. Why is it difficult to process cobalt in the US?
Because of, you may not like our senator from West Virginia, but he is correct when he says we have to expedite permitting. If you want to set up a new plant or a new mine, it's going to take 20 years in the US. We've lost the race by that time. So there's no really processing plant right now in the US. They'd have to build one, they'd have to get the permits. We're encouraging the government and companies to look at old chemical processing areas where the permitting should be easier. And obviously, up around Buffalo, where they've had chemical plants, where there's not, in areas where there's not too many residential activities, it should be possible to get chemical plants up and running faster. But that's the real issue.
There's one more question in the chat, and then we'll take the hand that's raised. What is the dependency on Belgium for?
I don't think I mentioned Belgium, but Belgium has one of the largest manufacturers of the active materials in the batteries. But we should be able to do that in this country. We have some small offshoots of the major European manufacturers up in the Midwest. They can make the materials there.
Okay. And Don Hughes has his hand raised. We'll go to him now.
Yeah, I'll get my video going if it will. A couple of questions. One, you mentioned the need to eliminate cobalt. How close are we to that? I seem to remember that Tesla was moving away from cobalt to something else. I don't remember which metal. And part two is there a successor to lithium batteries on the horizon?
Okay, let me address the cobalt one first. Cobalt's very expensive. 90% of it comes from the Congo. Half of that is child labor. So there's huge politics on that. Cobalt has been a critical material within the batteries 3-4 years ago. 1/3 of the cathode was cobalt. Right now, most of the car companies are down to about 20%, 15%. Tesla's down to 10%. And the question we're all addressing is how low can we get it? Can we get it to 5%? A lot of people saying we can't get it to 0, but we're trying to. So, and that's being driven by costs more than anything else. So wherever there's an economic driver, it's much easier to get it into the market. And the other one was on lithium, well, beyond lithium.
Other technologies, for example, I read there was a recent development in making, I think this was in Japan, coming up with a zinc oxide battery that was rechargeable.
There's a number of other developments out there. There's quite a lot of zinc work going on. This is essentially your alkaline cell making that rechargeable, using air there. They're all much, much lower energy density. So you're not going to use those in cars or any portable device. They may be viable for large grid storage. There's interest in making sodium-ion batteries. And there's interest in flow batteries of one sort or another. But flow batteries have operating costs, and utilities prefer not to have operating costs.
Okay, more questions from the chat. What about graphite domestically? And do you see a possible increase in this important product?
I said in the anodes of batteries, they're partly natural graphite and partly artificial graphite. There's absolutely no reason why the US couldn't make the artificial graphite. They'd probably have to put a tariff on Chinese graphite so they can make it in an economic manner. I had involvement with an Australian company who has a very good graphite mine in Africa, and they're hoping to ramp that up. Then that graphite could come straight to North America. It does not need this hydrofluoric acid treatment. But it's just got to be the will there and the investment in those plants to make it happen. And the large companies have to see they can make a profit.
Here's a comment and question. Thanks for this presentation. I wanted to ask your opinion about whether the storage of rare earths and copper, nickel, graphite, and cobalt are going to be a big ongoing problem because the planet has limited reserves. The scale must be huge because our entire ICE fleet must be replaced.
There is a shortage of rare earths, and that's what goes into the motors. I think that's why I think we need to do more research and replace those. Cobalt, I said we're trying to phase out. there's a lot of political issues. There's a huge amount of nickel in Canada, and there's a lot of nickel down in Brazil. So there shouldn't be a shortage of nickel. Copper, there's plenty of copper around. The question is, are we allowed to mine it? So I think the Biden administration stopped the expansion or the reopening of a copper mine in Arizona maybe a year ago. So there is copper there. It tends to be polluting, so we need cleaner technologies to do it. But there's copper, say in Arizona, there's copper also down in South America. But really what we need are cleaner manufacturing mining technologies for those materials, but they are available and I don't see really any problem there. And there's huge amounts of nickel in Indonesia.
Has cobalt been found in Greenland?
Is that the reason why Trump wanted to buy Greenland?
Yeah.
No, there's a lot of minerals they think in Greenland. But as anybody who's been to Iceland knows, Iceland is really green and Greenland's totally covered with ice. So it won't be easy to get it out. But there's a lot of valuable metals in Greenland.
And let's go to one more question in the chat. The mining impact of lithium-based batteries will be huge. What are the prospects for hydrogen fuel cells?
Any mining, and lithium is one of them, it has no negative impacts. That's why we have to come up with better technologies. My understanding, there's a couple of companies operating in South America now where they're actually going to pump water into the brines and concentrate the lithium before it comes to the surface, which will make it much less energy intensive, use less water, and be able to expand. But there's research going on there. There are clay lithium mines in Nevada, which I think are in court at the moment because some of the Indian tribes there don't want the mines opened on their land. And obviously there's lithium in North Carolina, because if you look at where the lithium companies in the United States, all in North Carolina. And when I got into this business, all lithium for the United States came from North Carolina. So we have quite a bit, not enough for all the batteries we want to use. I think that question also mentioned hydrogen fuel cells. Hydrogen fuel cells make sense for large trucks, buses. They make no sense whatsoever for cars. A hydrogen fuel cell station will be a central activity. They're very expensive, over $1 million to set up. Hydrogen is not easy to transport. So the perception is if we start going to fuel cells, then what we'll have on, say, the rest stops on the interstates is a solar farm giving electricity to a large storage battery, which will then generate hydrogen on the spot. But why I say hydrogen doesn't make sense for cars, if you're going to put hydrogen into a car, then in a fuel cell, that hydrogen is going to be made from electricity. You've got inefficiencies all the way along that line. So you might as well put the electrons into a battery in the first place and then use that. And I should emphasize, if you're talking about fuel cell driven vehicles, they will also have a very large battery in them, because fuel cells can't do acceleration. They can't do regenerative braking. So if any of you saw the BAE Systems buses, it's a large battery with a diesel engine. The diesel engine charges the batteries. It doesn't drive it, so they're all electric. They built one bus, which they replaced the diesel engine with a fuel cell, but the batteries were still there for the acceleration and so on, so the fuel cell kept those batteries charged up. But if you're talking about 16-wheelers going across the continent or buses going across, fuel cells may be the ideal way, or for fleet vehicles, so you can have a central service station.
And a comment about lithium has been found near the Salton Sea. The Saudi Arabia of lithium per Governor Newsom of California.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk, calling that instead of the Imperial Valley, the Lithium Valley. And I think there's a number of power systems there that get the energy from hot water from down in the ground. And in that water, there's a lot of lithium. So they're talking about how to get that lithium out. That might also rejuvenate the Salton Sea area, which is pretty much an environmental disaster at the moment. So there are pros and cons there. I think people are looking at that as one big source of lithium, and it's a native source of lithium. There's also quite large deposits of lithium in northern Mexico. And they were being developed up to about maybe a year or 18 months ago when it became too dangerous for them to work there. The mine was midway between two drug cartels.
Well, there's no more questions in the chat. Chris Berger has his hand up. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, Stan.
Hello.
You mentioned, I know your focus is on batteries, but you did mention pump hydro, so it seemed like an opportunity to ask how that compares with other mediums using that same principle, like anything from sand to gravel, stack block, all those types of things. That do you know anything about how they compare with pump hydro and why we wouldn't be looking into those as well?
The moving parts, none of them are technically viable. No. There are technical issues and they all have economic issues. So there are some pumped air systems, I think maybe 2 of them. They're not used solely as pumped air, they're in combination with a gas-fired generation station. But none of those have become economically viable. They talked about putting air in some of the salt mines in upstate New York, but when they look at them, the economics just aren't there. And it may be there'll be the same issue. We try to build a huge new pumped hydro these days. But pumped hydro, the big push there is to put better motors in. So they're up to 73% now. So if you've got an old pumped hydro system, if you install better motors, you'll get more energy out of it. And if you look at the river between Syracuse and Oswego, there's a number of straight hydro systems there, which we could use. So I look,
It's kind of funny because at least the other mediums don't suffer from evaporation and things like that. So I'm just curious of why these other, again, basically operating on the same principle, why they're not looked at.
No, I think in upstate New York, I'm not sure there's a net evaporation or a net addition. So, no, if you've been to Niagara, the power generated hydro there, a lot of it's pumped hydro. So if you stay in a hotel overlooking Niagara Falls, get up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and there's essentially no water going over the falls. It's all going to a big reservoir 30 or so miles down, and they use that reservoir to generate power during the daytime. And obviously they're generating power at night.
I was aware of that. Thank you.
Can you comment on technologies for recycling lithium batteries? I have heard of a company processing or proposing to build recycling plant via combustion in Binghamton area. Well, yes, that's a over and done with, but I'll let you comment, Dr. Whittingham.
It wasn't really combustion. They were going to heat these up so they get most of the carbon and other stuff out, but then make a black mass. And it was going to be, in my mind, environmentally polluting, but it's a brute force and ignorance technique, the combustion end of things. So you burn everything up, you get cobalt oxide, nickel oxide, copper oxide, no lithium because that goes away in either in the air or in the sludge. So that's the worst method of recycling. I think initially Endicott approved it, and then when they saw some of the details about it and the state environmental authority raised questions about how effective it was going to be, the company, which I think was Korean Technology with some investors from New York, dropped the idea. There's talk about another company coming in now, which will use smarter methods. The major recycling next to a gigafactory is recycling the waste from that gigafactory. And that's very good material. And you should be able to take that off the electrodes and feed it right back in. None of this combustion, none of this ruining it. And also feed back the copper to a copper plant. So I think we're looking for cleaner, sustainable methods. It needs some research, but people are working on that. There's one ex-student of mine who started up a company down in Virginia. He's got funding for it and he seems to be going ahead. And the key thing, if we're doing recycling, we need what we call a passport on the batteries. So you know what's inside that battery before you recycle it. Is it iron? Is it nickel? Is it cobalt? What else is in there? So you can use the right process. And the key thing on lithium batteries, you don't want them to be in a black container because they then get mixed up with lead acid. And if a large lithium battery gets in a lead acid recycling plant, it gets crushed and it blows up and can be a serious hazard.
Okay, let's go back to Cindy. You are unmuted now.
Can you hear me now? Because
Yep.
okay. All right. My question is, first of all, I found your talk just extremely interesting. But and I want to comment too about the mining and things like that. It's interesting that you're talking to the Sierra Club, and the Sierra Club has probably been one of the groups that's active against stopping mining. So it's going to be hard to figure out, what is really environmentally sound and what is not environmentally sound with these, these
Right.
extraction processes. But what I wanted to ask you is, I like the idea of North America being together with this, Mexico and Canada and the US, but I just can't see that working out. I just can't see with the political things going on. Is there any work that's being done to try to educate political leaders on how it's important that we all cooperate with the supply chain? I mean, it sounds great, but to do it, but I just can't imagine it working very well, particularly with the division in this country.
Right now, the Washington policy is it's a North American supply chain with one or two additions. Australia is defined as part of North America for this purpose, plus one or two other European companies. So they're talking about really putting a consortium together of what they would describe as friendly nations where we can work together, building a technology together. But no, we can work with Canada very easy. No, Quebec provides a lot of power to New York.
Oh, there's a question I missed a little ways back. How does North America keep new technology away from control economy countries?
Well, we patent it and we don't license it to them. China's been fairly good in the sense of not stealing battery IP chemistry because they know they can't export it. Because if we got a patent, they can't sell their products overseas. And that's really what they want to do. So they were very big on the lithium iron phosphate batteries for a long time because there's no intellectual property protection on those batteries outside the United States itself. So they could sell to the rest of the world with no issues. They're now involved in all the layered oxides because all those patents have expired. But if we came up with new chemistries, new processing methods, no, I made it very clear we should not license this to certain countries.
Okay. And then there's two hands. We'll go to Valdi and then after Valdi, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. Initially, just want to add to your comments about hydrogen. It's because it's the smallest molecule there is and the lightest element there is, it's very difficult to contain it and keep it from escaping through any tiny little crevice or crack or loose fitting, and then just keeping the density, the energy density, you have to either liquefy it or compress it to super high pressures, which also adds to the difficulty. And then this hydrogen itself causes what's called hydrogen embrittlement in steel as well. So you have to account for that too. So that all adds to the problems of trying to use hydrogen. So I echo what Dr. Whittingham said as far as hydrogen is going to be relegated to large vehicles, perhaps airplanes as well, unless lithium ion or other battery technologies get to the point where they have enough both volumetric and mass density, so that in other words, the weight, the amount of energy that's in a certain amount of weight you have to carry around is at the point where it makes it feasible to put them in long distance trucks, which people are already doing with lithium ion batteries. But if the energy density goes up, that means the weight that the trucks can carry and the distance they can travel without having to recharge gets to be that much better. And the same thing with airplanes. Once you reach a certain energy density in terms of the mass, I think it was somewhere around 400 watt hours per kilogram, if I remember correctly, maybe 500 watt hours per kilogram. Then you end up having aircraft be more feasible, and maybe we'll bypass this idea of powering aircraft with hydrogen, maybe except for cross ocean, ultra long range transport. Does the project that you're working on, or Binghamton University itself, also allow for research and development in other methods, other chemistries besides lithium ion batteries and other energy storage means as well? I'm just curious because it really hasn't been mentioned, but what do you think?
The New Energy New York one is restricted to lithium batteries. We're submitting, I think tomorrow, a similarly very large grant to the National Science Foundation called Engines, which will build off our New Energy New York, and that will look at other technologies beyond lithium. It'll be more research oriented. The big difference, it will allow us to give funding to industry, so we can actually partner more effectively than we can with the EDA one, which does not let any money flow to a for-profit entity.
Okay.
And
There
are people working on sodium ion here. There's people working on fuel cells at the university and in the incubator in downtown Binghamton.
Good, very good. And the other thing I'm wondering too is, since we have a fairly large audience here of community members and perhaps some members of the press too, is there something that you recommend that community members or others in the general public ask for, push for from their elected officials in government, or even just appointed officials, in terms of helping this project keep going, as well as other things that need to happen even besides New Energy New York project?
I would say no, help in expediting permitting so we can set up gigafactories, whether it's for lithium ion or putting solar cells together, so we can push those things on. I'm not saying we should reduce environmental standards.
That's the problem.
But just no, work on getting things not okay. We'll look at this next month. Then they say, okay, we've passed this now next month. We need just faster action. No, in New Energy New York, we've worked with all the local municipalities. I've talked to Endicott. My colleagues have talked to people in Binghamton. So we try to bring on the community so they're fully aware of what we are doing. The Gigafactory has done the same thing. And when people know what you're doing, they're much more comfortable than this threat in the background. And that's what happened with this recycling plant.
Very good. So one of the things I want to just clarify to build on what you just said is that we need more staff at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to help with reviewing permits related to renewable energy projects and with energy storage projects, and perhaps even with mining and that's more important at the federal level as well. So those are the things that you can ask for when you're sending emails or letters or making phone calls to your elected officials. We don't have a lot of time. We're down to a handful of years to cut emissions by half. And we've got some pretty ambitious goals that are really necessary in New York State with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And to meet those goals, many things have to happen. So these are all things that you can ask for and keep advocating for. And laws and regulations need to be changed to back up and enable meeting these goals, both in the New York State as well as nationally. So just thank you and keep those in mind.
Well, it's about the time we need to wrap things up, and we really appreciate Dr. Whittingham spending his time with us. I imagine you have other things to get to the rest of your evening. And we feel good about honoring you. This award, we'll send you a little more information, background on what this award really is. We give it out almost every year to deserving people, and you certainly were one of those that we felt was very deserving. So any last remarks by anybody or Dr. Whittingham, anything from you?
No, I just like to thank you all for attending. And if we're to accomplish things, we have to all work together and pull together.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay. We will be shutting the meeting down, and everyone have a good evening, and thanks for your participation.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you, everyone.
Good night,
Thank you, Dr.
everybody.
Whittingham.